I am going to apologize because my internet is going in and out today for some reason. So if I disappear, I apologize. But yes, we are welcome again to our first webinar series hosted by the Greenbelt Youth Ambassadors, and we have some great panelists today. I'm just going to start with a very brief presentation, just outlining what this webinar is going to entail and who our facilitators and panelists are today. Cindy, could you just share the presentation so that we can get started? And then just the present button. One to the right. Yep. Perfect, thank you. And just to let everyone know who has just joined us, we are recording this session, and I do ask that everyone keeps their mics muted, and you can either turn your video on or off, completely up to you. So starting off with our first presentation is on youth activism, striving for a sustainable future. So we are going to meet our facilitators. And so the first ones, and our panelists, so the first group for you guys to meet is the Greenbelt Youth Ambassadors. So next slide, Cindy. And next slide. So we are a group of high school and post-secondary students who have united to work towards protecting and expanding the Greenbelt while promoting sustainability and the establishment of complete communities. And my name's Ariella, and I will be the facilitator and moderator for today. Next slide. Next up, we have the Community Climate Council, and they are, next slide. They are a youth-founded, volunteer-led, not-for-profit organization advocating for local climate action by promoting climate literacy and political advocacy in what is currently known as the Peel region of Ontario. And the panelist representing them today is Divya. And then next slide is the Simcoe County Environmental Youth Alliance. And next slide. And they are a youth-led environmental organization made up of students who are passionate about their environment and building towards a more sustainable world. And our panelists today are Bolu, Karli, and Cara. So that was just that quick presentation. And now we are going to get into the panelist discussion. And if anyone has any questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter them into the chat. And we will leave questions to the end for our panelists to answer and discuss. So panelists, if you guys want to turn your mics on and we can get started. So the first topic we are going to talk about is Highway 413. So starting the discussion with what are your concerns about Highway 413? Karli, you're first on my screen, so if you want to start.
Yeah, so people recognize that the population is growing in this area and that the highways are getting more and more congested, and the amount of traffic on the highways is increasing. It's getting slower, and it's just hard for people to deal with because they are impatient, just like all people are. People feel like highways are congested And by developing 413, they believe this will improve the traffic flow. But this is not necessarily true. More often than not, a new highway will actually bring more traffic as it encourages drivers to come out and drive on the highways because they think, oh, it's going to be fast. I'm just going to hop on the highway and get over here. There won't be much traffic, but then there is. So people, in my opinion, believe this highway is necessary to combat the increasing traffic on highways. They neglect to confront the environmental challenges they will face once another major highway is built.
Perfect, thank you. Cara?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. My main concern with Highway 413 is that it's the greenhouse gas emissions. If you're familiar with the recent report on climate change by the UN, they recently just sounded code red for humanity. And so in the middle of a climate crisis, we really shouldn't be trying to emit more greenhouse gases. It should be the opposite. But Highway 413 would add roughly 17 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And 2050 is about the year that the Earth would have to go completely net zero to avoid a climate catastrophe. So that's my biggest concern with Highway 413, and that also the transparency issues in which the public isn't being told everything, and especially now with how everything's being fast-tracked, it's all just a big scramble to build more when really we should be scaling things back and reevaluating how we currently live, how our systems currently work, and how a highway might not, like Karli said, a highway might not actually fix it. A highway will make it worse and encourage urban sprawl where the areas are supposed to be protected.
Yeah, no, I know it's not, a lot of people have misconceptions about what this highway will bring for our future. And that's why we're having these discussions right now. Divya, anything adding on to, or what are you concerned about with the highway from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So I echo what both of the other panelists said. Mine might be a bit of a long-winded answer. There's just many things that come to mind when you speak of concerns with this highway. First of all, the climate change impacts. Secondly, the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt has natural capacities to act as a carbon sink. And the fact that this highway paves over it, we're not only adding fuel to fire, like was mentioned, adding greenhouse gases emissions to the environment, but we're also taking away the tools that we would need to, put out the fire in the future, which is our Greenbelt. And also the fact that it paves over wetlands, because wetlands are important in cleaning our waterways, along with a host of other benefits that they have for the natural environment, and also just the forests and other natural environments that the highway paves over host a huge range of biodiversity, which may be invisible or insignificant to us, but play a very important role in the environment that they exist in. Car dependency also is obviously a very big concern because of the greenhouse gas emissions that come from the transportation sector. It's already one of the leading causes, and this highway will just propel that sector to emit more greenhouse gas emissions, which is worrisome for me as a Peel region resident, which the highway passes through, because it will directly impact our air quality. All of the cars traveling up and down this highway, the emissions that come from those will affect our air quality directly, and also the wildlife and habitat loss, and the natural landscape loss. Like, I live at the border of Brampton and Caledon, and I love being able to go out there and see an open field rather than seeing buildings all the time. So that's just very worrisome to me, to know that in the future there might be just rows and rows of houses there as well, compared to anywhere else that I look in Brampton. And also just the unsustainable and short-term planning of our farmland. I think COVID-19 has pulled a lot of problems to surface, and the fact that we're still not aiming for solutions that aim to increase and enhance our local food production, and instead we're just paving over our farmland. I think it's just very short term and very unsustainable.
Yeah, there's so many great points with that answer, and we're definitely going to be breaching on some of those topics and how these highways will be impacting and affecting us in the future and in the long term. Bolu, last but not least.
I definitely think that everyone has definitely given some important and really true points. And my biggest concern overall, I definitely agree with everyone, but my biggest concern is the fact that we all know that climate change is one of the biggest issues that we're facing. And yet we're not doing anything about it. I don't think we're doing enough at all. And for some reason, the Ontario government is deciding to build such a highway, knowing quite well that it's not going to help us move towards the future that is more sustainable, that is more environmentally sustainable, or that is going to move us towards a future of net zero emissions. So I think that is definitely my biggest concern, just to cap every single thing that everyone has said, amongst the fact that it's going to impose on a lot of natural wildlife, like the Greenbelt, which is one of the most important things to our natural ecosystem and things like that. So I definitely think that it's just the fact that we're moving backwards, really, when we should be moving towards a future that is more environmentally stable.
No, I know it's such an odd thing for, yeah, exactly. The Bradford Bypass too is definitely impact and a highway impact, and we're definitely going to be touching on that as well. But with the Highway 413, it's been called in recent publications, it's been called the zombie highway. Our province has been trying to push this highway for years and nothing has happened. Do we think that with the federal environmental assessment coming through, that it could either put an end to this project or maybe further emphasize the impacts and the devastation that this project is going to show, and maybe help sway people who are in favor of this? Bolu, do you want to start?
Yes, based off of what you've said, I am definitely hoping that for the fact that it's become such a issue that's been dragged for so long, I'm hoping, I'm very optimistic that it's hopefully going to be put aside, and we're going to try to reroute our mindset and the way our societies work and function. And I think that there is a reason why it's been dragged for so long, and that's because people know that this isn't what should be happening, and people also want the change that we need in order to move towards a more sustainable future. So I'm definitely hoping that with youth becoming more aware of these issues that are going on around our local communities, and adults learning to care more, that hopefully it definitely does get put aside eventually. But yeah.
Cara?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I think the best case scenario to come out of this issue is that it gets canceled completely, and that it doesn't set a precedent that it's okay to just fast track any infrastructure that the government think it might need as a short-term solution, and that instead all the time and money that was invested in dragging this project for so long gets put into something more sustainable. Like, to actually solve the issue, the money could be invested into more public transport and just better solutions than just a highway that paves over a bunch of natural land. And I hope that the environmental assessment will incorporate a climate change assessment too, to kind of fit with the times, because right now, if using a 20-year-old environmental assessment is not going to help. It's not. It's just going to make the issue worse, and eventually it will be irreversible. So.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I'm hoping that mindsets and thoughts and everything change with this project and with the federal EA coming out. Karli?
Yeah, so everybody likes to take the very optimistic side of this, saying the federal government is getting involved. They are doing environmental assessment on this project. It's going to show all the damage this highway is going to cause on our environment and how detrimental it's going to be to our plan for the future. It's not going to be good. But more often than not, I don't like to take the pessimistic side, but I often do, where I have a hard time believing that the federal government is going to see that this highway is just not a good idea, that the environmental costs are not going, are they don't believe the environmental costs are going to outweigh the benefits that this highway is going to have for society. Obviously, we don't see that. We see that in the long run, this highway is going to just break down everything that we have been trying to build to get to these goals for 2050 of zero greenhouse gas emissions, and just building another highway is not going to get us there. And they don't see that these goals are very important right now, which is not right, but that's a whole other fiasco. I hope that they do. I hope that they see the terrible costs this highway would have for our environment and our future. Yeah.
Yeah. I am so sorry, guys. My internet is cutting out like no tomorrow today. But I did get, I agree. I know it's hard to be positive in this situation and to not go for a more pessimistic outlook, because you think of it and you see it and you see how things have progressed in our government, either current or past, in terms of environmental decisions and environmental impacts, and you want to be hopeful, but it's hard to have that grain of hope in you. And lastly, Divya.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in answer to the question of whether this, the federal EA could end the project, I think absolutely not. I think, the provincial government was trying to fast track the environmental assessment for the project, and that's why environmentalists demanded a federal EA. But that in no way just stops the highway. Ontario still needs to send the impact agency, which is the federal department, an initial report of its plans. And then that in itself triggers a 6-month timeline for the agency to determine whether a full EA is required. So right now, the answer is we don't know how big or small the scope of the federal EA will be, whether it will be conducted, whether the provincial government will be, willing to comply with the federal processes. They can very much challenge the federal EA in court if they wish to. So I think the project is very much still on the line. And I also think that the message around achieving the federal EA designation wasn't clear enough, because surely there are a lot of people who do think that, now that the federal EA is achieved, that the project will be done and over with, which is not true. And I think that's halted momentum a little bit, but that's why it's great to have events like this and, being able to communicate about this project further, because we really do still need people speaking out about the project. And really now the pressure is just to be put on the provincial government to put an end to this project without wasting further federal and provincial resources behind its studies and reports and such.
Yeah, no, it's very much, there's been that news of the federal EA happening, but then there hasn't been, well, at least I haven't seen any recent information or any updated information on the progress of it, or where it's going, or even how the provincial government is going to react to it, if it's going to be in a positive manner or in a not so positive manner. But with that, what would the cost to benefit ratio be with building this highway? And what would compared to what cost to damage ratio for the environment would be? And how would these, like, how would you compare these two and demonstrate to a normal citizen on what the impact that these highways would have on them in their daily life that they would not even think to recognize? Divya, if you want to start off with this.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a great question and one that's not talked about enough. Coming to the cost benefit ratio, MTO has said that the highway will save some commuting time, and it's estimated to be about 30 minutes for those commuting the same route as compared to if they were to take 401 and the 400. But I don't believe this is accurate because it doesn't hold a comparison to the 407. Also, economic benefits have been highlighted by the MTO and just the GTA West project team by itself, with the GTA West website actually claiming that the highway will generate their 350 million in GDP per year, but the highway will cost the government billions of years already when the government is reeling in from the economic sort of fatalities of COVID-19 pandemic and having to deal with all of that. It is, it's also, that's the reason it's estimated to be a toll highway, because it's very likely that that's the strategy that will be adopted by the government for paying off its debt that it incurs in building the highway. So when you compare, when you factor in all of those facts, it's really difficult to say for how many commuters those 30 minutes will be saved, especially if it's a toll highway and not that many people would be subject to using it. And then the cost of land surrounding the highway is estimated to go up, obviously, but the Star and National Observer did an expose a while earlier that showed that much of the land surrounding the highway is owned by developers, that have ties financially to filling the pockets of the provincial government. So there is a question of ethics there and who this project is really profiting, who is really, behind pushing this project, and also the fact that we will lose a lot of productive farmland that this highway plows through. I think all of those factor into just the cost benefit ratio when you look at it just from a standard economic / traffic perspective. So when you look at the environment, this highway doesn't have any environmental benefits. It's only the cost that will be incurred. And I mentioned some in an earlier question, but to reiterate, this will just lock us into a car dependent mode of transportation. So that doesn't help in reducing our GHG emissions, which we very desperately need to do in order to meet the objectives that we've set for 2050. And the fact that this paves over forests, wetlands, rivers, waterways, farmland, all of that has detrimental effects to the environment. So yeah, I think when you look at it with the facts, there's a lot more evidence to the detriment that this highway does to the environment compared to the benefits, the so-called benefits that it adds to commuter lifestyle.
Yeah, no, those were all great points. Like there's nothing more to say than those were all on point to the topic and to the issue. Bolu, Karli, or Cara, do either of the three of you have any more to add to this?
I would say that from my experience, when it comes to balancing the pros and cons of whatever infrastructure they want to build, I think it's very important to be truthful and to honestly speak the fact that, yes, I do get that, maybe it could decrease the travel time and then people are able to commute to work more efficiently or whatnot. But I think the biggest thing we have to do is point out the fact that the long-term effects are more detrimental than the short-term enjoyment that we may even have. I think we have to really point out the fact that even in Canada now, we're starting to see a little bit more drastic storms, and we're seeing drastic weather patterns than usual, and point out the fact that it's all around the world too. And it's not going to just affect us, it's going to affect every single person. And in the end, it's not really the wealthy people that are at risk at the most. It's the fact that it's the poor people of Africa, it's the poor people of Asia that don't have the resources to protect themselves. So in the end, we do have to start making these difficult choices, and we have to start making them now. I really just think that that's the biggest point I always try to make to whoever I'm speaking with, is just to get them to understand that, yes, it might seem really good right now, but come 5 years or 10 years from now, we will regret this, and we already are. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I know it is that there's just so much impact with this highway that's not been told to the general public, or it's not being publicized or spoken about enough with the general public for them to be like, this is not something that we want in our area. So I definitely agree. Cara and Karli, either of you have anything more to add?
I think everything that has been said is really fantastic, and it's very important to be talking about this. It's important to recognize that all of this is happening, but I don't have anything else to add right now.
Okay, Cara?
This one was covered really good. I think like the reason this highway, people are pushing it so hard, is thinking about the future, like thinking about the population boom that's going to come, thinking of just an increasing population. But a highway it's not encouraging a sustainable future. It's not encouraging the future that will see us through the climate crisis. It's not a future that will benefit all of us. So when the rewards aren't actually sustainable, like when the rewards actually start to hurt us too, that's when you know that it's not a good decision. Like if a reward is like, oh, it's like less traffic time, then what does that really cause? That causes more cars on the road, like what Karli said. So when the rewards actually become risks, that's when you know it's a good idea to put a stop to it.
Yeah. So now we're going to move on to the Bradford Bypass. And we can start off with the question of what are your concerns about the Bradford Bypass? And Bolu, if you want to get this one started.
Yeah, so I definitely think that the highway and the Bradford Bypass have a lot in common in the fact that they will end up infiltrating on a lot of the natural ecosystem. And once that occurs, then we see a lot of native species being lost, and native animals and native plants being lost in the ecosystem. And that essentially starts this ripple effect of the circle of life. I know this might sound a bit cheesy, but it starts to affect little things. And once that starts to happen, eventually that will work its way up to us. And I think that usually that's when we start to care, when it starts to affect us, but we don't want it to get to that end. We want to put a stop to it before it gets to that point. So I definitely think that they have such huge similarities, and we definitely also need to do more about them too.
Yeah, no, I know there's a lot of, it's like basically a parallel because it's one's going east from the 400 and one's going west from the 400. So there's definitely a huge parallel in the impact of them and where they're going to be located.
Exactly. And it just seems a bit really redundant. And I really do think that there has to be better ways of transportation than building more highways, especially when we already have like train tracks. Why not invest more into those and making them more better and making them more efficient and faster, and just making that better instead of just building things that won't actually fix the issues in the long term. So in the long run, really. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We should be investing in the infrastructure that we already have instead of trying to create more that's unnecessary. Cara, do you want to add on to this?
The issue I mainly have is that here the environment is an afterthought. They're using an environmental assessment from 20 years ago, which doesn't even take climate change into consideration. So really our future is being put second. Once the environment is put second, we are dependent on the environment. We are dependent on our earth. We're nothing without it. And so when I see the environment being put second, it's a major red flag. Like, oh wow, you really don't care, do you? Like you're just for the short term, like quick reward, like just the future being put secondary. When the environment's put secondary, the future is being put secondary, and it's a major red flag. And that also with, like how Bolu said, that people don't really care until it starts to affect them directly. Like it will affect everybody directly, like the contamination that can run off the highway, like road salt, building materials into the Holland Marsh, the Holland Marsh is one of the most profitable farmlands in Ontario. It allows for Ontario to have better food security. And so really without that, if that becomes contaminated, like if the risk and reward again, like it's really not worth it. So that's just what I think.
Yeah, and just leading off of that, if you also want to take this question with the Bradford, so Highway 413, we were fortunate enough that there was enough noise that the federal EA came in and they stepped in with the assessment for the Bradford Bypass being that old, 21 years old. It wasn't even, there's policy in place now that wasn't even taken into account when the first assessment was done. Do you guys think that the federal government's going to step in and try and do another federal EA if like Ontarians can make enough noise about it?
I can start off. I hope they do. I guess that's being really optimistic, and Karli's probably going to come in and say no, they won't. I don't want to think that they won't, because that would be really bad. And there's a lot of like transparency issues right now about how like everything's kind of discussed in the dark without the people it will affect actually knowing it will happen. So yeah, I really hope that by making enough noise that the federal government will step in. But then what will the federal government do? Like they're the ones pushing pipelines and stuff that will hurt. It will hurt us. It will hurt our future. It will hurt our environment. Yeah, be made into an election issue. I think that it should be a major election point. That, do you care about like a black and white question? Do you care about the environment or not? Because that's, at this point, that's really what it is. That's really what these decisions are, is do you care about us? Do you care about our future? And it's really irresponsible to use resources and time only to use an EA assessment that is over 20 years old and doesn't even consider the current situation of the climate crisis, no climate change impact assessment. So yeah, I really hope they step in, but.
I agree 100%. And I honestly can't help but wonder the amount of things that is also being missed that we haven't even thought about in the past 20 years that we don't even know about, that's actually been unknown. And I was just thinking back to one of the campaigns that we did as SIA, and to make our case more solidified, we had to go through the Simcoe County websites and the Barrie website just to find more information of what the government has done so far. And it was absolutely tedious. The language used was not the kind of language that an everyday person could understand. And I honestly think that's another really big part that deters people from politics, is the fact that they usually use the language that people will not understand. And when people don't understand, they usually just dismiss it and be like, oh, okay, whatever, I'll just go with this, because why not? At least I'm voting. but instead of actually taking the time to really do an in-depth research and all that. So I honestly think, yeah, I totally think it's inaccessible for the everyday person, and it just doesn't, I also think that's one thing that really, really needs to change. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I know it's if you're not someone who's either interested in politics or interested in policy, taking the time, like I can fully agree. As for GBYA, we've done political campaigns, and it's just taking the time to understand and fully read in the documents is not the easiest thing. Karli, do you have a more pessimistic standpoint, as you said before?
Yeah, like Cara said, I do take a bit of a pessimistic standpoint. I don't really think that the federal government is going to get into the Bradford bypass, and I'll tell you why. So Highway 413 is closer to Toronto and those bigger cities. It affects those people there, and there are a lot more people there. They were able to create a lot of noise about Highway 413. Like, I was talking to someone from British Columbia, and we actually got on the topic of Highway 413, and we talked about that environmental issue. People all across the country know about 413, but not a lot of people know about the Bradford bypass. They are the same issue. They have the same highways. They both go right by the Greenbelt, through the Greenbelt, and they all affect the surrounding Great Lakes or freshwater lakes. But the federal government does not care as much about the movement around the Bradford bypass because we have not created enough noise. We need to amplify our voices. We need to get everybody who was involved and continues to be involved in the 413 highway and that opposition. We need to get them involved in the Bradford bypass opposition. And then possibly, then I believe that the federal government will get involved, but just getting there will be really hard. But I think we can do it, hopefully.
I like the little hopefully at the end. Gives us hope. But just with like I know the Bradford bypass is not advertised and it's not spoken about enough. But what would you guys, Divya, if you want to take this question, because I know you did a lot of work on Highway 413 with getting word out there and just having movement. What were some things from your Highway 413 campaign that kind of helped bring forth this huge movement and help bring forth word about Highway 413 that it was enough noise for the federal government to get involved and maybe being able to translate some of your work into the Bradford bypass?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the short answer would be just like people power, whether you see it on screen or not. Behind the scenes, there are many individuals who, you know, are day and night are committed to stopping this highway and voicing their opposition to the highway. I think it is true that our proximity to Toronto has helped because the fact that, you know, Toronto Council at their council meeting was discussing Highway 413, even though it doesn't directly run through Toronto, it was very important, you know, but I think Peel is also a very key just demographic. You know, in GTA, it's one of the fastest growing municipalities, so politicians typically pay a lot of attention here. So I think that's, you know, that's contributed to the fact that, you know, this movement has become what it's become. I think there was also just a lot of sort of anger, resentment towards the provincial government and what they were trying to do in fast tracking the project, but also in completely just dismissing a lot of existing environmental protection and regulations. I think people needed, you know, an avenue to take action, and Highway 413 sort of presented them with that choice to voice their concern for the environment in a very tangible way. the Bradford Bypass has sort of suffered because of the limelight the 413 has got, because they both are equally destructive. But I think, the Highway 413 has been discussed for many, many years. The Liberal government canceled it previously, and now, the new provincial government has restarted it. So it's a topic that's gotten a lot of heat in the past, and it's continued to do so. And I think some strategies that could be applied to Bradford Bypass is now, even for people who are taking action on Highway 413, like, just because it doesn't run through our area doesn't mean that we can't talk about it and that we shouldn't, because it is very much important, and it's basically the pillar of everything that we're fighting against Highway 413 for. It still has the same sort of implications for the environment. A lot of the impacts that my fellow panelists have mentioned and that I mentioned, they still hold true for Bradford Bypass. So I think just already, maybe it could be beneficial to already use the existing sort of momentum that's been generated through Highway 413 and divert it a little bit towards the Bradford Bypass.
Yeah, it's definitely something that can be translated, and it's something that I think if organizations that are more central in Toronto or more central in the GTA start making noise about it, it'll definitely bring a sort of spotlight to that area. But then, so with the Bradford Bypass, and with us talking about how we can have more engagement, Bolu, if you want to take this one, how do you feel that you could bring other members of your community into the fold to be able to get them to be talking about this issue, and learning about it, and just bringing light to it in all of the areas? Because I know also a lot of where the Bradford Bypass is going to be passing through they're not heavily populated areas to begin with.
Yeah, I think that is an amazing question, and it's one that I also gradually forming the perfect answer for. But I think that whenever it comes to any issue that concerns the climate and the environment and things like that, I always think that it's best to just state the facts and speak your truth, and then also provide some solutions that actually help to fix that issue. I think a lot of people, for example, when it comes to the highway, a lot of people would say that, oh, what about the economical benefits that can come with it? And what about the short-term effects? Short-term benefits. They will give you a lot of good examples of why we should have it. But I think it's also very important to acknowledge those and then explain why they're not as effective as a more long-term and effective solution, and then provide some other further solutions that actually move us towards a more sustainable future. Another thing that I also think is very important is to connect with people with things that they actually really care about. So for example, if you know someone is a big fan of art, well, don't connect with them on something that's more agricultural based, if that makes sense. Maybe find a way to connect them through something they really care about, like art. Or maybe if there's someone who owns a restaurant, connect with them with how the highway can really impact the local agriculture, and just find ways to connect with people with things they really care about. I always find those the most effective, because then they really understand that, hey, wait a minute, this will also affect me and my way of life eventually. And I always think that that's a really great way to start from. But I feel like my other panelists will also have some great ideas too. But yeah.
Yeah, Karli, do you want to speak on this next?
Sure. Yeah, so just reading through the chat, Kelly has a really good point. Getting in touch with schools to bring on more voices. If you get into the schools and you get all of the youth involved, you can create a really big voice around this issue. If all of the kids in the school make an art project or write poems or write letters to their to the municipality and the provincial government, then they will realize how big of an issue even children think this is. And if it's school involved, they will see that even teachers and the principals are concerned about this issue if they're trying to get their students to advocate or to oppose the bypass and look into why this is not the correct answer to solving our problems.
Yeah, no, I know I've seen recently, maybe in the past like 5 years, I want to say there's been a huge movement to having youth be more engaged in environmental works and bringing our voices to the environmental platform and to the environmental policies that are being created, because we are, as crazy as it sounds, we are the future of Ontario. And if it's not something that we like, we should be able to speak up about it and have a voice and be heard about it. But we just have time for Cara to speak on this last topic, and then we are going to start going through some of the questions that are in the chat. And if people have more questions after, we can go through those.
Okay, I'll keep my answer nice and short. It was short anyways. It's pretty much just stay informed. Like if you don't know something, just stay informed. Look it up. Do your research. Connect with other people. Join a group. Show up. And if you can't show up, social media activism is a real form of activism. A lot of people don't think it is, but getting the word out there, spreading the word to help other people stay informed is also very important. So yeah, my biggest point is just if you want to be more active and engaged, just stay informed, listen to others, and support others.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of our panelists and for all of their answers and all of the information that you guys have given out to everyone here on this webinar. And I am going to get started with some of the answers, some of the questions from the chat. If I see that they've been answered in the chat, I'm going to skip over them. But oh my goodness, so much. Wait. Let's see, where's the first? I can't even find. Cindy, can you find the first question? I apologize, everyone. This chat was much more. I don't know. Did we touch on if? So it's from Kelly. She's wondering if the environmental assessment could be made into an election issue. I don't know if it was touched by anyone or if anyone wants to speak on it. We can start with that question and just move our way down.
I think Cara did mention, did give like a really brief response to that question about how it definitely should become like a really important political point, and how political parties should definitely be held more accountable, and to see if they actually put the environment as a frontier, as one of the issues that they want to tackle. And I 100% agree. I think that we are going way too easy on the government in terms of the climate and like climate activism. I think we also need to understand the fact that they are in their position for a reason. That is their job. Their job is to tackle these big issues, discuss them, and effectively find ways that actually solve them. So I definitely agree that it should become a political point now and forever, really.
Okay, that is, I agree. We are a little bit short on time, so I am gonna move to the next question. Could each of the panelists provide advice on the best ways to engage in the Highway 413 and Bradford Bypass issues?
I can start, I guess. So as mentioned earlier, follow everything on social media. There's a bunch of organizations that you can follow on Instagram and Facebook that post often about updates and stuff like that. There's also sometimes news about it. I know that Simcoe.com and Aware Simcoe and Barrie Today posts about the Bradford Bypass frequently, or they did about a month ago. I don't know, it's kind of off and on. Also, I encourage you to get involved with organizations like the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition, the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition. I'm not very familiar with all of the stuff down by 413, but the stuff up north by Bradford Bypass, I have some more resources. Also, if you're a youth, you can get involved with SIA and the Greenbelt Youth. Yeah, you can get involved with them. It's just reach out, ask if you can volunteer or just join meetings. That's a good way too.
With youth activism, do you guys, is there a way for getting youth to become more comfortable with speaking with politicians or even speaking to older members of their community, to have the youth become engaged, but then also have them become a leader in their community to be able to engage other members?
Absolutely. There is an organization, I encourage you to look it up. It's called the Future Ground Network. They do a lot of training and stuff for you to become your own environmental activist, to get in touch with your government, your municipal government specifically, because they believe you can do more action that way. But they have a lot of webinars and stuff about how you can reach out to your local municipality and politicians, and even, I guess, working with older people. Also, I encourage you just to get on your phone, call someone. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Just an older person. You can even start talking to your grandparents or your uncles, aunts about these types of issues. Just start practicing with some different people and you'll pick it up. Also, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. You just need to start talking and it'll be good. You can do it.
Divya, do you want to expand on engaging youth in these issues, and also bringing engagement out to your community from a youth perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think empowering youth, it's always tricky, but it's always very important. You can say that youth are sort of like the barometer of a society. You can measure how well a society is functioning based on the youth that rely on its systems are performing. So one of the ways that we find engaging youth is helpful is by already leveraging the networks of existing youth organizations working on an issue, because then you're not starting from scratch. You're not sort of working in competition with attracting people, if that's a possibility. So I think more collaboration in the environmental sector in itself is very important, so that we can all communicate across our platforms and sort of share the message more widely, in getting the youth more engaged with like taking action on this issue specifically. I think we all have a little bit of activism in ourselves, whether it's, as simple as you signing petitions, tweeting at your MPP, but even the little like tiny things that we do day in and day out, without realizing, is like the post on Instagram or Twitter that we react to and respond with. It does increase the visibility of those posts. So I think continuing to do that. But a lot of young people especially, I think, might shy away from this, which I very much relate with, because before I sort of had this confidence to speak with my elected official, I was very much intimidated. But I think practice makes it perfect. So when you start talking with your MPP, it just becomes easier to have a conversation with them and tell them that you do not want this highway and this is the reason why. Adding your own story, and the fact that you are their constituent, it holds a lot of power, and having that personalization, it really helps them to see that you really care about this issue. So a lot of youth might feel that, you know, they need to be experts on the topic and they need to know exactly the right things to say, or that their MPP will in somehow like debate them about, no, this is wrong, this is right, which is just not true. They are your representatives and they are here to voice your concerns on a bigger platform. So I think, you know, there's this misconception that, you know, we're in service of our politicians when really it's the other way around. So I think getting youth to, you know, tap into that power that they already hold and just speaking to their MPPs about it, it's very important. And not just MPPs, like your MPs, your, you know, local councillors. The local council played a huge part in the Highway 413 movement, because a lot of local councillors started just rejecting or opposing the highway itself. So I think every little bit helps.
Sorry, everyone froze on me, so I did not know if you were done speaking. But Bolu, do you want to add and expand on youth activism in terms of politicians, and maybe talk about how it could translate in the regions that the Bradford Bypass are going to impact?
That's a very great question. And I think that everyone has brought up really great points in terms of how to empower youths. But apart from like the youth perspective, I also want to look at it from like the adult perspective, especially with the adults that are in the room. Like, how are you also treating the teenagers and the youths around you? Whenever they bring up an issue, are you invalidating them, or are you giving them a listening ear and letting them know that their voices are valid and letting them know that they also have a seat at the table? And apart from that, I also think that in general, that the public usually underestimates the power of youths and like our voices and like our opinions. And I think that that also translates into politics. And I also think that we definitely need a more evident youth voices on whatever at whatever board table it is. So maybe if it's an environmental organization that's ran by the government, we definitely need some youth perspective from that too. So I definitely think that youth also deserve a seat at the table, and they also need to be heard, and they also need to be validated. And apart from that, in terms of getting youths more involved, I also think that you have to know who your target audience is. So that means that instead of posting on something like Facebook, where most youths aren't, like try posting on Instagram, where you're actually going to connect with people who are young, who are of a younger generation. Maybe if it's even TikTok also. I also think that we definitely need to be able to be flexible and be able to pivot with the way times are constantly changing. So even if maybe we're trying to target more of the older generations, we have to be able to find ways to connect with them. So maybe that's through using the local newspaper or maybe a Facebook group or something. So I hope I answered that question. There was a lot of parts to it.
No, that was great. And I think that was a great point to end on with bringing youth up to the table and just being able to pivot. And I know, especially during times like today, pivoting and being flexible and being able to be someone and to be an organization that's able to adapt efficiently and being able to bring youth into the fold is definitely a very important stance and opinion and something that should be followed. So we are at 7:01 p.m. I just want to say thank you to everyone who came to this webinar series and the conversation in the chat. Everyone was so engaged and I really appreciate it. I also want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, so Bolu, Cara, and Karli from Simcoe County Environmental Youth Alliance, and Divya from the Community Climate Council. You guys were more than what more than amazing. I don't even have words on to how grateful I am for you guys for this. This was our first webinar of this series, and I think you guys blew it out of the park and definitely raised some huge standards for our next presenters. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can definitely send an email to greenbeltyouth@ecospark.ca. I am hoping that that was our right email address, and I can always pass these questions along to our panelists for them to have more input, or you can follow us. All three of us are on Instagram. If you guys want to put your Instagram handles in the chat, Maria, if you could put ours in the chat. Also, Divya put the political advocacy email into the chat. So if anyone has any more questions, or you guys want to continue the discussion with any of these amazing, amazing people, then feel free to reach out to them. And thank you so much for joining. Hope you have a great Thursday evening.